It often Silicon Valley's playbook: invest, scale, and repeat. Funders often define scale using the dimensions of financial sustainability, program expansion, and franchising/replication. And they use these definitions to inform their funding criteria and as a measure of an organization's impact. However, many African-led, community-centered organizations think of scale as a more complex than invest, scale, and repeat. It requires many more additional and invaluable resources, such as contextual knowledge, strategic planning, lived experience, and uniquely tailored, localized solutions. So how can we reevaluate scale and redefine how we invest in increased impact? Today, I'm joined by three incredible leaders in the African Visionary Funds Network to discuss the opportunities and limitations of scaling up. Join me in welcoming our esteemed panelists to introduce themselves and their work, starting with Linda.
Hi, everyone. My name is Linda Kamau, co-founder and managing director at Accuratics, where we're building African female tech talents, basically working with young women from underserved backgrounds and providing them with on-demand and market-ready skills to be able to secure opportunities in the booming tech industry in the African continent, and that leading us to be able to bridge the gender gap in tech, but at the same time ensuring that young women are financially independent, and especially to be able to break the intergenerational cycle of poverty. So yeah, looking forward to a great session, and yeah, welcome everyone.
Melissa.
Hi, I'm Melissa Mujeni. I'm wearing two hats today as CEO of the Grasha Machel Trust. We're a Pan-African advocacy organization that's improving outcomes for children and women on the continent. And my other hat is as a board member of the Luala Community Alliance, a leading CSO in Kenya that's transforming healthcare systems. Over to you, Willie.
Thanks, Melissa. Hi, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, or wherever that fits. My name is Willie Mpasuka, and I am the co-founder and executive director at Rays of Hope, based in Malawi. Rays of Hope works in the education space. We train in-service teachers. These are teachers that are already in the government system and they're teaching. So we come in to help and support them teach better. And we also tutor kids. So we run after-school programs and various activities to ensure that kids are able to do very well in their classrooms. And I think we have one of the largest teacher network in Malawi, working with over 3,000 teachers. Thank you. Looking forward to the conversation today.
Thank you, Willie. Thank you, Linda and Melissa. It's truly an honor to be having this conversation with the three of you. Before we get started, some quick housekeeping that we'll be having. And then we'll be taking a Q&A from the audience. And I encourage the audience to type your questions in the Q&A box throughout the next 40 minutes or so as we're having a conversation. Thank you. So I would really like to start our conversation by finding out what scaling up means to you in your context and experience, how you define approaches scale.
Can I go?
Yes. Sorry, there was a delay.
Right. Thank you so much, Adi, for a great question. So the question is, how do we define scale and how does our organization approach scale? So first of all, I would like to say that scale, just the word scale means replication, right? Means doing it extensively. But I think this conversation will not be complete if we are also not going to talk about the impact part. So it's not just scale, but it's scale at impact. And for us, what this means is there is good scale and bad scale. I think for the past decade, since the conversation on scale started to surface, it is slowly being verified as a bad approach to development. But I think it's because we have seen a lot of bad scaling approaches than good ones. And for us, scale means it's an opportunity to do more strategically and thoughtfully. And because of this, it is also a space where funders and doers can actually come together and look at ways and strategies on how to make scale a good experience. So like for Razor4, for example, what we have seen to be working in the conversation of scale is partnerships and collaborations. We cannot go solo and hopefully reach out to everyone. So one of the ways that we have proven to be really helpful in making sure that we are serving the many students with demonstrable impact is through collaboration and partnerships. And I think that has helped us to, in a healthy way, get to where we wanted to be in terms of numbers, but more importantly, in terms of the impact. And I mean, when we talk about scale as well, I think many times we just look at the point where we are replicating the model, but we are not talking much at a place where we are proving the model. And many times when scale has gone bad, it's either the concept was not proven right, it was rushed. So I think one of the secrets would be, first of all, let's prove the concept. Because when we prove the concept, there are so many ways to scale that concept. I mean, there's a very famous article on scale, your end game, what's your end game? And it lists like 6 ways on how you can scale. We are talking about government adoption. We are talking about replication. We are talking about just partnerships, open source. So I think it can only get there where the concept has been proven. Beyond that, I think that's when we have all these conversations trying to possibly say scale is not good. But I'm here to say when it's done well, it's an opportunity for growth and also a solution for the problems that we are facing right now. Thank you.
Thank you, Willie. Melissa, what about you? How would you define scale and how your organization approaches it?
Great question. I think I'll focus on the attributes of scale, at least from my perspective, and what it should look like in our sector. I think good scaling should be based on solid assumptions and evidence, as Willie said, that is tested and holds water. I think good scaling should be contextualized to meet the needs of specific groups or communities. And I think process is just as important as scaling outcomes. And scaling processes should leverage the assets within a specific community or ecosystem rather than being intrusive, and should ultimately be inclusive. At the Grasham Trust, our work is advocacy, and we consider ourselves facilitators for scaling advocacy agendas. That's how we do scaling. And our approach to scaling advocacy is grounded in the networks of women we work with. That's 4 different types of networks across 16 countries, comprising of women change makers. They define our advocacy agenda based on the economic development needs that they're surfacing from women in their own countries. They surface the challenges that these women are facing, whether it's access to finance and other issues, and they develop the solutions. And our role is to mobilize our access to policy-making spaces and policymakers to take these solutions to scale. A more traditional model of development is with the Luala Community Alliance, the organization I'm affiliated with as a board member. Luala is is a leading CSO that's working in the healthcare system strengthening space. And their infrastructural hub is a hospital in Migori County. And they provide services to the local community, as well as implementing a robust community health worker model, servicing the immediate community. But as demand for health services beyond the locality has increased, they've adopted a very smart technical assistance approach. So they're not replicating hospitals across different wards and counties, but they're scaling the knowledge that they developed and they've acquired through their own experience by strengthening the capacity and skills of public health players and community health workers in the wider region. So both as the trust and Luala, I would say that the way we approach scaling is scaling ideas, scaling knowledge, and scaling skills.
Thank you, Melissa. I really like that around scaling ideas, scaling knowledge, and scaling skills instead of just thinking about organizations or institutions. Thank you for that. Linda.
Yeah, thank you, Ati. So for me, and I think for Akirachix as well, how we look at scale is based on how deep we go when it comes to impact, and especially because we are in the business of skills training, of providing skills to young people for them to be able to be competitive in the job market and then be able to acquire or get a job and then be able to earn an income that then they're able to support themselves. And so for us, we look at it in terms of how deep do we go in terms of ensuring that this young lady, once she graduates from our program, she's able to actually secure a well-paying job, not just a job for the sake of getting a job, but then a well-paying job in a market that currently is very competitive. And so being able to get an income that is way above even normal, like the minimum wage in the country. And so this young woman being able to earn this money, it means that they start being able to ensure that the basics are covered in their homes, like food, shelter, and so with that, then it means that we can start seeing a healthy family and even a happy family, because half the time the issues we have in our homes is because we can't even provide the basics. But then we go deeper and start seeing this young woman growing. And so we're growing into the industry. And so we are moving from one income level to the next income bracket. And with that, it means that she can tackle more when it comes to, like the providing for herself and for the family as well. So we start seeing siblings or who would be struggling in terms of staying in school because of lack of school fees, being able to actually be in school. And so, comfortably studying and not worrying about being chased home for school fees. And so this then means that focusing, they can start getting good grades. And then with time, as the income progresses, we start seeing the young women going deep into, we currently are living on, we can pay bills and things like that. But then what if we actually ended up moving from where we are? I mean, maybe an informal settlement, or just being able to put together like a house for the family so that they are able to live comfortably. And so for us, we look at it that way, like what is the impact of this young woman, and how deep does it go to make sure that we are getting to a point where we can start breaking the intergenerational cycle of poverty, even in this just one home. And so we see, for us, we view scale more from a depth perspective than it is from a numbers, because even if we trained 10,000 young women right now, the question will be, what has been the impact of that? Like, what have we achieved with that? Yeah, we can say numbers, but then for us but then what is the impact of that young woman? What has it done to the society? Are we seeing people moving from living on $2 per day to, like being comfortable in terms of not worrying where their next meal comes from? And so for us, we view it more on that. And that's just on the human part, on the young women we train, but then also from the industry we serve as well. Like looking at it in terms of, it's a very male-dominated industry, and the only way to start switching that is just not getting more women into tech, but then it's moving them up the ladder and getting them taking up positions of leadership within some of the tech startups. We need to be moving them from junior to mid to senior to tech leadership. And so the only way that can happen is for us to keep investing in this person and making sure that we can see them move from one, not just from one income bracket to another, but then from one role level to another, because then it means that if they are able to get into the leadership, then we can start seeing a shift, and especially in some of the patterns that are currently associated in most of the tech startups or companies when it comes to hiring women or being inclusive or diverse. And so that's how we look at scale. It's more on the depth, because we feel like we can achieve more in that way than just thinking about numbers. Yeah.
Thank you, Linda. Yeah, I really appreciate what you said around, our societal shift takes time, investing in the depth is what's more important in your context and in work like yours, because it is about transforming people's lives, and that takes time. Thank you. As actually I did visit Accurachicks recently, as I was on some site visits with our colleague Aisha. And, when I was doing these site visits, one of the things that I learned from our partner organizations is that, there's this question that comes to me around how different yet effective each organization's growth strategies are. And the other question that really comes to me from these visits and conversations I have are, in an African context, when and why do skill strategies work? And when and why do they fail? Linda, if I may come back to you with that question.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I think for me, in terms of like, we can look at it from a point of why they fail is because of the fact that most skill is not defined by, like the organizations themselves that are doing the work. Half the time it's defined by the funders. And so the questions are always like, how many people can you serve? You tell them maybe I can serve 100 right now, but it's like, why can't you not serve 10 times that? Can you do 1,000 a year? And half the time organizations rush to actually do that because it's dependent on the funding from the funder. And so we rush to go ahead and implement programs to serve the 1,000, yet our capacity right now is 100. And the reason as why it's 100 is because we can actually comfortably transition our 100 students into the job market and ensure that we can track their growth over time. But then when you do 1,000, it means it's not something that we can actually comfortably place into the market and even be able to support in terms of getting them placed in jobs. But then most organizations will rush because it's based on the only way we can get funding is based on the fact that we can reach more people. And so it's more funder driven than it is, the organization's choice of actually defining their own way of skill. Sometimes even funders will go like, yeah, we can only fund you if your budget is above $2 million. And you're like, so your work is to, you're now working towards growing your budget to $2 million, but then it's not based on what your impact, what will you be able to achieve in terms of impact based on the budget that is $30 million. And so I feel like most of the times we rush to scale based on the needs of the funder than it is the needs of the organization. And so when we end up measuring this skill by numbers, it means we are going to rush. And there's many examples that we've seen, I think, in organizations that have quickly scaled, but then they were doing really well in terms of like the work and the impact, but then quickly scaled half the time based on funder interests and end up like a few years on, everybody going like, so what happened to those people? What happened to those people? And it's because we can no longer see the impact we used to see because of the fact that there was it wasn't scale that they defined themselves. It was just based on the fact that they needed to reach more people because of an interest of a funder. Yeah, so I feel like that's why most fail. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you, Linda. This rush to scale that can be a cause for failure is something that we've often heard about as well. So thank you for sharing that. Melissa, what about you? What are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, I think before I answer the question, just building off of Linda's response, I'm always reminded by this very rudimentary equation that funders have, and very few will tell us that they have, but we know they do, which is when you're submitting a proposal, they will look at the total budget value versus the number of people you're trying to impact. And I think that's incredibly rudimentary, and it glosses over so many factors on what it takes to actually impact positively the life of one person. But back to the question on, in the African context, when and why do scale strategies work, and where do they fail? I think in any context, building on what Linda said, scaling strategies tend to work when they're locally rooted and locally led. And I think the logic is quite clear. Those that are nearest or more proximate to a social issue, they tend to be better placed to innovate on solutions. And they're the ones that tend to have the immediate or easier access to the inputs that will enable that solution to take root, particularly assets around relationships and trust. I'll give an example of Luala Community Alliance. In the health space, stipends for community health workers is a well-regarded solution for achieving sustainability with this model, which is essentially a workforce volunteering model. Luala, which is a locally rooted organization led by community members, have been working closely with local public health authorities for years. And once they generated enough evidence through working with government on the efficacy of a stipend for community health workers as a means of retaining them and keeping them engaged, and helped the local government authorities design what this model could look like, the county in which Luala is focused primarily, Migori County, became one of the few counties to offer stipends to community health workers across Kenya. And we have 47 counties. So we contrast this with many INGOs or international nonprofits who will implement multi-million-dollar public health service programs. And after some years of the community health system being propped up, or the community health worker system, the program ends, community health worker engagement rates drop, and health indicators decline. So I think the logic around sustainability and who's best placed to implement sustaining change and scale is quite a compelling one. And for me, this ties into a bigger question, or maybe a concern around how scale is being resourced and who's implementing scale in Africa. We know that a majority of philanthropic bilateral aid is being channeled through northern headquartered or foreign-led organizations. I believe that these organizations absolutely have a place in the sector because it takes a village, and as a continent, we're battling multiple challenges. But if you're a funder from the global north, having a conversation primarily with northern-based or center organizations around delivering large-scale impact in Africa, I think that's a real problem.
Thank you, Melissa. That's really a critical part around who is defining scale and who is impacting then, as a result, what kind of ideas and what kind of leaders and organizations eventually get funding to grow their work. And thank you for that. Willie, coming to you on this topic.
Thank you so much, Ati, and thank you, Melissa and Linda. Very great insights. And I think I'll build on that from a different angle. So why and when do scale strategies work, and what happens when they don't? So first of all, I want to say this, that there are so many factors involved. And I would like to, first of all, acknowledge that the funder system is a broken system, but also the doer system is a broken system. And because these are two broken systems, it makes the whole conversation on scale a complex one. So I'll give you an example. Globally, we are led by indicators that they have been infused with the scale mindset already. So for example, by 2030, X number of lives should be served, or they should be out of poverty and all that. So as that tone has been set, our governments and those people around us, all of a sudden, they are now clinging on to that kind of thinking where they are thinking, if we are going to put numbers to timelines, then we are going to achieve impact. But I don't think that should be the way it should. I think 7 people or achieving impact, you cannot just plot it on a paper and give yourself a timeline with some numbers that you've just thought to make the case really solid. So for me, I think it will help so much if we can sit down and contextualize the problem, understand the problem, and map out a solution to deal with that problem away from all these frameworks that have already been set. If we can be sober enough, I think we are going to start doing this thing. So I think because we don't have that level of sobriety, so we just do things because they have already been set that way. That's why many times I think attempts to scale really fail. I said earlier on that, first of all, we need to prove the concept. Many of my colleagues have failed in this because, first of all, they were rushed, and it builds on what Linda already said. You walk into a room and you're talking to a potential funder, and the first thing he asks you is, how many people do you serve? Or how much is your budget? And the decision from this funder then is built around those questions, forgetting to ask you how many lives have changed since you started working on this. So I think this is why I'm saying the funder system and the doer system, they are broken systems. And until we realize that, I think scale will still be something that will hurt us. That's first. Second, I would like to mention that as doers, as people that we are doing this work, I think we need to learn to drop our pride and work together. Because one of the ways to achieve scale at impact would be collaborations and partnerships. But many times, and this has been written in literature, many times doers are not willing to even learn from their fellow doer. And in the end, we cling on to our ideas that are possibly not making sense, but because we want to be on our own, we fail to actually achieve scale. I also want to mention this, that funders, they need to be willing to take risk and invest capital and fail together with the doers. And again, many people, they wait for you to prove the concept, and then they would come with you and be like, hey, how can we reach many people with this? But they suppose that somebody has taken the risk and they have invested in your idea or in your work to serve people, and then they can come in later on. And I think if investors are also willing to take the risk together with the doers and look at the problem and navigate on ways to serve the people, I think scale can actually work. I just read an article and it was pretty much saying that you cannot have a formula for scale. You need to adopt a zigzag approach to scale, where when you start to learn of something, you try to tweak something and you try this, but doers can't go alone. And funders cannot just even invest when the doer is not ready to do that. So again, coming back to my point, I think these systems are broken and they need to be fixed, and funders and doers, they need to come together and find out way to actually achieve scale, because that is not in place. That's why we are seeing a lot of failure in actually achieving scale. And the last point I want to make is, even us as doers, let's be clear of the end game. What's our end game? And Melissa mentioned that one of their approaches to scale is to scale the idea, to scale the knowledge, and to scale the skills. But if you'd ask many people that are trying to achieve scale, they are looking at how to make their organizations bigger. And I think that's not what it's supposed to be. Thank you.
Thank you, Willie. This is where, definitely an interesting conversation around how this is a broken system that kind of ends up feeding itself back and forth, where when funders are often interested in scaling numbers, it pushes doers to scale when they're not ready, and that can end up causing a lot of issues. A follow-up question that I have around that is, what is the impact this has on the people these ideas at scale are intended to serve? In your experiences and areas of work, what have you seen? It's open to anyone interested from the three of you.
I'm happy to jump in. I think some of the clear ones are disengagement from communities, lack of ownership from communities, disengaged key stakeholders, including government, etc., the permanent stakeholders that at the end of it, as civil society, we know our interventions are by and large temporary. The folks that are meant to kind of uptake and run with things in the long run, they're not equipped, engaged, motivated to do so. And I think that comes back to multiple factors, including how these large scale initiatives tend to be designed, etc. But if you don't mind, I just want to touch on something Willie referenced, that the issue is not just the funders in the room. And I agree. I mean, in defense of funders, I think that many donors and players in the sector will point towards the reality that sometimes they are in that many local organizations with the capacity to absorb X million dollars or deliver on a particular level of scaling or impact. And I think the counter to that is investing then in strengthening the scaling capabilities of local organizations. Or to his point, investing and innovating around strategic partnership models for scaling. So considering consortia of predominantly African-led organizations and local organizations to ensure their meaningful kind of inclusion in these larger scaling projects. And I think if we look at the pathway of scaling, any great idea, there was always someone that had that idea previously. There was always someone, to Willie's point, that did that proof of concept, and attribution was likely lost along the way if there were a local partner or local implementer, and that's really the truth. There's always a Luala Community Alliance or an Akira Chicks or a Grasham Shell Trust at the start of that pathway, innovating and delivering success at that level. But as the process of replication of ideas and scaling happens with different larger players who look very different and take on the idea, the innovator is often forgotten. Their learnings are often distorted, and uptake of that solution may not be as effective. So as funders, why wouldn't you want to meaningfully engage folks along that scaling pathway, in particular the innovators of the solutions? So I think you're absolutely right, Willie. It's a complex one and no one answer.
Thank you, Melissa. Linda, do you have any thoughts around this challenge that ends up affecting both sides?
Well, yeah, I mean, I think even in terms of like when I look at Akira Chicks, and I mean, if you told me to train 10,000 right now, it will mean that those 10,000 wouldn't thrive. So it does affect the young women because they'll just have a skill, but then won't even be the right skill, because quality is really important. And especially because, I mean, the tech industry is more of a practicality than it is a paper. And so like, what can you do in terms of your skills? And so if I'm not able to provide the right skills, it means that it will be so hard for the young women to get opportunities in the tech space. And so it would be counterintuitive to be training, but then, placing them, which then ends up getting us to the same place where we have a very high youth unemployment crisis in the African continent. Yeah, we might think it's not because the jobs are not there. Yeah, in some aspects, some jobs are not there. But then when I look at the tech ecosystem and the tech industry, that's where opportunities are right now. Is like it's quite a very a booming industry, and so it means that we had more skilled young people. It means that they'll be taking up these opportunities. And so if I train more people who cannot get the right skills, and so even with these opportunities they can train, it's counterintuitive because they won't be able to get the opportunities because they won't match the criteria or the standards that the startups or the tech companies are looking for when it comes to skills. And so again, the tech startups will be frustrated. They won't be able to get the talent that they're looking for. And so half the time they'll outsource, they'll end up looking for, like companies. Half the time, most of them are based out of India and the rest of the places to do the work. And so it's like, we'll just be going around in circles on the same, youth unemployment. Youth don't have skills. Like it's just the same thing. And the people we are affecting is because we're not putting in the right, like when it comes to strategies, skill strategies. And some of these, I think, which then boils down to what could we do better, is some of this is just, again, I think, as Willie said, it's both the doer problem and the funder problem. But then where do we meet at the center? I think I was having a conversation with Willie not so long ago, and just saying like, like people need to take risks because yes, we do need to like scale, we do need to do more. And I mean, as Willie said, scale can be good. And so we can do more, but then maybe we just need to, try out some new programs around what we do, try out different things. And so it means that we need people to, take those risks with us, like put in some money to help us pilot something here and there. But then most of the times funders don't want that. They don't want to put in, money for, let's try this out. Maybe we could reach more if we did it in this direction. But then it was like, no, I mean, I've had that discussion with some funders and go like, this is what I want to try out. But then they go like, yeah, maybe we can talk once you've done the pilot. And I'm like, so who is meant to fund the pilot? I mean, so you want to come and find a pre-packaged, like solution and just put in the money, but then no one wants to take the risk of like, like investing in that. So I think it's it's like, I feel it's like sometimes a battle where, we all want the same thing, but then it means that we need to find a way we all come to the middle and find ways to actually work together. Yeah.
Thank you, Linda. I think what you said kind of adds up to Melissa's point earlier around local solutions that put that context in perspective as they're thinking of growth strategies and ideas, as well as this idea of coming together and working together. Thank you for that. So I have a couple of other questions, and one of them is really around, what solutions we have or we can think about as it has become the norm for funders to measure impact through numbers, which we were talking about a lot around this impact at scale conversation. Ways are there to measure other things that you think funders can learn from this conversation? Willie, starting with you.
Thank you so much, Ati. I think I want to say this, that we're talking a lot about the work in the communities and how funders make decisions. But I was thinking, can we scale power? Because these funders, they walk in these conversations with a lot of power, and many times they're untouched. And I think what would actually be interesting is how willing are they to scale their power, where they can actually sit at the same table with the doer and be vulnerable and talk about the big elephant in the room. I mean, many times I've seen projects that have been designed in Washington, D.C. The whole framework, the monitoring framework, has been done in Washington, D.C. or in London, and they are shipped into an African community for people to apply and to get the funds and then to implement, and then hopefully they are going to solve the problems that we have. And I think if we continue to do that, we are still going to be talking about this problem forever. For me, I think one of the solutions that we can actually share with our friends is to let's scale the power. If we scale the power, and then let's see what that's going to happen. Second, I would also want, I hope, that together we can start to appreciate scaling partnerships and collaborations. I think if we, and this goes both ways, doers and funders, where we are willing to even scale our power as doers to say, even though I thought of this idea, I think it's working very well, I don't want to be the only one doing this. How can I then let go and others find the same solution and take it their way and apply it in their own different context? So I think let's scale power, let's scale partnerships and collaborations, but also let's define whose agenda is this? Is the scale agenda coming from the doer or the funder, or it's both? When it's both, it's going to be very easy to achieve impact. But when it comes from one end, it's not going to work, because a doer will say, well, I have this great idea. We are already doing this. I need money to scale, or I need to prove a concept. And the funder is going to say, well, pilot it first, prove to me first. And if a funder would also come into the room and be like, hey, I have this money, but I'm only going to fund someone who is ready to scale when they did not invest in the pilot phase, it is going to continue being a complex conversation. So if we can define who owns the agenda, if we can scale power, if we can scale partnerships and collaborations, but also if we can try to educate ourselves, what does scale really mean in this sector or in this context? I think there hasn't been a lot of conversation in customized scale. And I think that's really, really important. And maybe considering those things, we may start to find some of the solutions that are needed for us to scale at impact. Thank you.
Thank you, Willie. Melissa, what are your thoughts here?
Great, and I think you cut off when you were asking the question. So just for the audience's sake, I think the question was, what are alternative ways to measure increased impact beyond numbers? I think this is a tough question. I think a good place to start is not just measuring, but trying to understand what that scaling pathway looks like, who the various actors involved in that pathway are, how we went from innovation to scale up, and who needs to be engaged along the way. I think metrics around the strength of partnerships between those organizations tasked with driving a scaling solution and those players who will ultimately embed that solution in local systems long term, so the permanent players we spoke to earlier. I think it's really interesting to look at how a community responds to an intervention, particularly if you're thinking about sizable, high numbers, measuring the reputation of implementers of these solutions. How receptive have local communities been to how those interventions were rolled out and how they were engaged? And that's sometimes a good metric to determine how far a scaling solution has been imposed versus not. Similarly, measuring community ownership of an idea. Some of the lessons that I can distill from the trust that does primarily advocacy, it's really hard to measure impact when it comes to advocacy programming. A lot of people have that long-term goal around a policy change or a legislative change, which is almost a unicorn always. So, we've learned to focus on the ideation stage, that exciting part of advocacy at the outset, where you're measuring the robustness of innovations and ideas, as you're crafting, a compelling advocacy strategy or campaign, we've adopted a longer term timeframe for achieving lasting results. And some funders may not want to hear that, but that's something that we can't negotiate on because there's so many factors outside of your control when you're thinking about advocacy long-term outcomes. We've broken down those outcomes so that we have more realistic impact indicators that go beyond the kind of big picture. And often we center the beneficiary or the individual that we're trying to reach, understanding their experiences, listening to their stories. I think testimonials are so important to kind of showcase the long numbers, because numbers are great, but ultimately you want to center the beneficiary or the group that you're trying to impact change for in your work. And so understanding through a case what the life of person X looked like pre-intervention and after, and what it might look like a couple of years later is really important to tell that story.
Thank you, Melissa. That's really powerful around centering the work and interventions based on the people that those interventions are supposed to be supporting. Linda, what are your thoughts here?
Yeah, I think I'll just echo Melissa and just build up on that. We really don't always have to measure, but then I think, before we get to measure, can we first of all also look at it from different angles? And in this case, can we look at it from a sector specific? And I say sector specific because the same way you can scale, like a program, a health program, is just not the same way you're going to scale like a skills building program. And I say this because we've seen a lot of times when you're asked, can you do 10 times this? And I think the idea is assuming that we can multiply just like the same way other things are multiplied. I'll give this example in terms of, if you want to vaccinate young kids with polio, it's just about, like ensuring that everyone is vaccinated. You're just going to make sure that the word is out, do a lot of advocacy, like to the villages and everywhere else to make sure that all the kids are vaccinated and given the polio medicine. But then while at it, you can't take that same approach and try to fit it in when it comes to skills building. I've always said this, that we are not going to mass market our way out of the youth unemployment crisis in the African continent. That's not how it's going to work. We are not going to assume that we're going to do things in the masses and then, yay, youth unemployment crisis is solved. It doesn't work like that. And especially because skills building is very, very, I always say it's a hard job. It's hard. I mean, I respect teachers every single day because transfer of knowledge is really not easy. And especially when you're dealing with very different demographics. And so when you look at skills building, you have to look at it in a very sector specific. So, and when I say that, it's because, for instance, when I look at the tech industry, it really needs hard skills, like hard technical skills. So you're not just going to assume that we're going to make sure everyone that is a young person between the age of 19 to 25 can use a computer, can use Word and Microsoft Word and Excel and PowerPoint, and good, they're digitally equipped to acquire a job in the tech industry. That's not it, because the way the tech industry works is really different. Startups are raising money after money in the African continent. I mean, it's just April now, and I think startups have raised $1.8 billion. It's just April. They raised $4 billion last year. I mean, they're poised to get to about the $10 billion mark this year. It means that they're going to be looking for talent, and the talent they're looking for is just not the basic, I can use a computer talent. It's about hard skills, it's programming, it's design, it's tech research, it's product management. And so if you're going to be able to feed that, it means that we need to develop the right skills. And that takes a lot of time. it is costly, and actually it needs a lot of attention. You can't just assume that you're going to train someone and that's it. So if for me, when I look at scale, I look at it in that angle of what can we do to make sure that this sector is actually equipped with the right talent. But then in terms of us, how are we growing to ensure that we can serve that market and serve it really well, so that they don't have to get to a point where the talent we are feeding that market is not the right talent, and they will have to end up outsourcing the work to other areas, continents, and get back to us to the same problem of youth unemployment. So I think it's just understanding that we can't copy paste the same method, but then when we look at it from a sector perspective, then it actually can yield a lot of benefits. I know I was reading an article, and I think this was either on the ILO or WEF forum, I can't remember, but then it said that we will need to approach skills building from a very sector specific, like the way we build skills from the tech industry, the way we build skills from the financial side. Those are very two different ways. And so we can't assume that we're going to train the same way. And especially if you're saying we want people to have meaningful jobs, because our goal is just not to train for the sake of training. We need people to get meaningful jobs so that we can start seeing the impact of these meaningful jobs in their lives, the lives of their families and their communities. And the multiplier effect here becomes that we're going to get to a point where we can start seeing our economies and the GDPs of most of the African countries growing because of the young people who are able to actually feed into the economy. So yeah, so that's how I'd look at it.
Thank you so much, Linda. And for all the you, Melissa, and Willie, for all of your insights. Time is running towards the end, so I wanted to jump into some audience questions that have come to the Q&A box, but I really appreciate your insights, and I can see that we can have this conversation for a much longer period if time allowed it. So one question that came up was if you could share more about what it takes to achieve proof of concept. And this is a point where I think both funders and organizations struggle. The M&E feels daunting and funders don't want to adequately invest in the process. I've also put it in the chat for you. Anyone who's interested in getting this question from the three of you.
Yeah, I can start. I think in terms of, when you say proof of concept, I think there's an assumption that needs to happen within a given time frame of your organization running, which I think is very wrong. It's a terrible assumption because half the time, some of the problems we are solving have not been solved before. They've not been solutions that have actually worked before. And so we're all trying to figure it out. And that's why I said, like, it's always really good to have funders that take the risk of helping you figure out what is actually the model of whatever you're doing. Can you actually get to a point where you can define, this is our proven model, and we believe that if we focus on this, it will help us reach get to a certain point, our impact will grow in times X because of the fact that we have a defined model. But then to get that, I think for me, I usually say it's not predefined based on like, you started in 2022, meaning you need to have your proof of concept in 3 years. It doesn't work like that. When I look back at the work that we do at Acurechics, it's taken us a while to get to a point where we were comfortable with our model. And a while I'm saying, like, I keep saying, I feel like we're a startup because we just figured out what our model is. It's been like it took the first 6 to 7 years of Acurechics was just figuring out, does this work? Does this not work? Does this work? And so, and at the end of it all, it's gotten to us to a point where we can say, this is what our model looks like, and this is what we feel like we could, take to the next level. And so it's, for me, I feel like you also need to define it yourself and be patient with yourself as well as an organization to know that you can't have it right all the time. And it's okay, there's money you won't get because you don't have the proof of concept, from funders. But then the question is, are we going to work towards figuring that out in terms of the model? But then when you get the patient funders as well, who are going to walk the journey with you, then invest in actually making sure that we can get there together. I think, yeah, I think for me, those are the insights I'd feel in terms of like, it has to be, you have to be patient yourself, but then finding people who can walk that journey with you to get into a level where you're confident to say, this is our model. We've tried it out. We know that it works. We can take it to the next level. You can move from proof of concept to, like, let's go to implementation on a higher, like we can multiply it by 2 times or things, something like that. Yeah.
I'll go on next. I know time is running out. I think
Yes, go.
For me, I think we don't build organizations to scale. We build organizations to react and to respond to a problem. So for me, I would say the best way of doing it is stay true to your calling. Go serve those people. Have that impact. That's the first. Second, the community and the people are your heroes. Work closely with the community. And I think if we just get consumed in the idea of serving people and responding to a problem, but also recognizing that the community and the people we serve are our heroes and not us or our models, I think you can achieve proof of concept in no time. Thank you.
Thank you, Willie. Melissa, any thoughts here?
I'll keep it super brief. I think that's a great question. What I've seen in the sector is that many more of us than not tend to overlook one critical element of program design, which is scaling strategy development. And so from the outset, developing a scaling strategy, so we're thinking ahead and figuring out, which folks we need to be partnering with, even when we're looking at proof of concept, to ensure that our results are, getting out to the right audience. Which funders do we need to start speaking to today? Which major initiatives government is rolling out that we can align our body of work to? I think as a standard, we need to get into the habit of developing scaling strategies for every intervention. I think to Linda's point, some funders have a greater risk appetite for investing in proof of concept or post proof of concept, that being that initial funder that's looking at that scale. Others want to see a lot more impact, and that's okay. I think as well as looking at a scaling strategy from the outset, mapping out the funders who are going to be the right funders at the right time, so that you don't waste your energy on some of the big folks, and perhaps you can identify the philanthropic ones that might be more willing to take a risk. I think that's important as well. I'd love to share a case study, but I know we're out of time, but happy to email you some reflections on how we've tried to do this at the trust.
Thank you, Melissa. Yes, please share that study with us. And we also have a lot more questions than we were able to answer on this very, very interesting conversation today. And what we will do is we'll show the case study and answers to some of your questions that have come in the Q&A. What a rich conversation this has been. I want to thank our panelists, Linda, Melissa, and Willie, for your insights. It's been a pleasure to learn from you all. And before we close off, as we still have a few people on here, any final thoughts or ideas you have around what you hope funders can take away from this conversation as we close out our conversation today? Thank you so much.
I think my parting shot would be look locally and speak to more locally led institutions to see what scaling means for them and to co-create the idea of impact around a specific intervention.
And I'll end with, let's stop equating scale to success or greatness. I think bigger is not always better. But let's have the discipline to find an authentic definition of what impact truly means. Thank you.
Yeah, and I'll close by saying, listen to us. We local leaders do know what we're doing most of the times. We do, because we live in the spaces that exactly, the problems you're solving, are really dear to our hearts. So just listen to us. And when you do, and when you work with us, it means that we can achieve more together by knowing that I'm an expert in my field. And so by the time I'm saying this, I believe that this would be the right direction. I have seen and I have tested, and I know that it's possible. We just need to believe that I can actually do it. And so you have a lot of resources, which is good. And so if you bring your resources, I bring my expertise, then it means that we can actually achieve more together. So yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you so much. I think one parting lesson is that scale cannot be a one-size-fits-all solution. And if the ultimate goal is to serve and impact diverse people with varying realities and needs on the ground. Again, thank you all for joining us today. Thank you for our funding partners for empowering our work, the School World Forum for this platform, and for all of you for creating a community with us today. And again, thank you to our panelists for such a rich and memorable dialogue. You can find us online at theafricanvisionary.org, at the AV Fund on Twitter, and the African Visionary Fund on LinkedIn. Thank you everyone again, and have a wonderful day or evening based on where you are. Thank you. Hi, do we have, oh, we still have people in there.